Hello. As we start our second week of Advent, the first week you light the prophet's candle, focusing on how people were waiting for the Messiah. Advent means one who's coming, or the coming of. And so Advent talks all about the coming of Christ, who the prophets were waiting for. The second candle we light is called the Bethlehem candle. It focuses on how God worked to prepare for the coming. When you think about having to take a test, most of us want to prepare for taking the test. I have wonderful memories of going fishing with my father as a small child, and we would do all sorts of preparation the night before so we could get up early in the morning, and just as it was getting light, we could already be in the boat on the water. So there's preparation for important things of life, and God worked to prepare his people for what it would mean to have the Messiah come. In today's focus and preparation, we want to bounce off of Isaiah, who spoke of Christ very, very often. But Isaiah, and through Isaiah, God let the people know that God's ways are not ours. Isaiah 55, verses 8 through 9. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declare the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. God had been preparing the people of Israel for how to respond in a cultural situation where their country might not be in charge. In the book of Daniel, we see Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We see them humble themselves under a foreign authority. We see them make an appeal to those who are in charge so that they could obey God and not have to go against their conscience and not have to disobey their authority. We saw Daniel, especially in the opening 2 chapters, make an appeal and give God the opportunity to move powerfully to rescue his people. And so Daniel saved all the wise men. We see in another book in that same time period, in the book of Esther, Esther, through very wisely laying out the groundwork to have the king very interested in just what her appeal was going to be, she saves all of the Jewish people by wisely humbling herself, making an appeal, and waiting on God to move to deliver his own. We have heard through history, sometimes over the last couple of years, we have heard that peaceful protests never accomplish anything. The only thing that changes attitudes is violence. That is certainly man's way of handling problems. God's way was not violence. We saw in Daniel humbling himself, making an appeal to those in authority, and waiting on God to solve impossible problems was God's way. Esther mirrored it, and so did Nehemiah. Nehemiah was the cupbearer. Maybe you might think of the chief butler, and very probably the taste tester for the king's food. Nehemiah realized that Jerusalem had never been rebuilt after King Darius or Cyrus allowed the people to go back to Jerusalem. Nehemiah's heart is broken in how poor a condition Jerusalem, God's people's capital city, was in. So he humbled himself, made an appeal to the king, and won through God's deliverance the finances and the ability to rebuild Jerusalem's walls to protect his people again. God had laid out time after time after time this process, humbling yourself, making an appeal, and waiting for God to move in to rescue. But in Jesus' day, they were looking for a Messiah who would be military conqueror, they were ignoring all the preparations God had given through Daniel, Esther, Nehemiah, Ezra, and many others, and instead they looked to the Maccabees, who had picked up a knife and stabbed the ruler instead of making an appeal. And through that murder, they had years and years and years of conflict and lost thousands of people's lives. God said, my ways are not your ways, my thoughts are not your thoughts. And so as we prepare our hearts for Christmas, to celebrate Jesus coming, to look for his second advent, his return, may we learn from God's preparing his people that rather than taking things into our own hands, especially with violence, God gave a pattern of humbling ourselves when there is trouble and heartache, making an appeal to those who are in authority, giving God time to move in step and change things so God gets the glory. I'm Jeff Minier with Shiloh Baptist Church of Bowie, Maryland. We put these devotionals on our Facebook page to try to be a blessing to you, those who know Christ as their Savior, to grow you in your faith, hope, and love. To those who may hear our devotionals and have not yet trusted Christ, we're here to be a help. So when you have questions, please message us back connected to the video. Go to our website, shilohofbowie.com. As we're going to be building up more and more of the messages available, downloadable resources to encourage you in your walk with God, or encourage you in how to develop, how to get to know God in the first place. Thank you for joining with me today.